Welcome to our immigration briefing program. Today, we're diving into the fiery protests erupting in Minnesota where tensions are boiling over. With 1,500 troops on alert and the threat of the Insurrection Act looming, local officials and residents are voicing fierce opposition to federal law enforcement's aggressive immigration crackdown. Violent clashes, racial profiling allegations, and community fears are making headlines as the situation remains highly volatile. Please continue to watch for the detailed scoop. Next up, a surprising twist from CBS. A report on the Trump administration's deportation practices, which was pulled last month under political pressure, is now set to air. The story features harrowing stories from deportees in El Salvador, highlighting the human side of immigration enforcement and raising questions about media censorship amidst political tensions. Stay tuned as we unpack the controversy behind this delayed exposé. And finally, in the world of music and morality, Bruce Springsteen has publicly condemned ICE tactics, comparing federal officers' actions to Gestapo methods during a surprise performance. His passionate stance underscores the growing civil rights concerns over immigration policies. Despite dismissive responses from Trump, Springsteen remains outspoken, rallying support for immigrant communities and emphasizing the importance of protest and resistance. Please stay with us for more in-depth coverage. The BBC reports on the escalating tensions in Minnesota, where residents like Sunshine are actively monitoring and confronting federal immigration enforcement agents amid ongoing protests against Trump's immigration policies. In Minneapolis, the clash between federal authorities and local communities has intensified, with ICE agents deploying unmarked vehicles and residents risking their safety to document their presence. The situation has been further inflamed by the controversial shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent, which has galvanized community resistance and prompted legal restrictions on the use of force against protesters. The local government and residents are pushing back against what they see as overreach, with some community members even suggesting that federal agents are racially profiling, while Trump's administration defends its crackdown as targeting dangerous criminals, despite evidence of detentions of innocent migrants and citizens alike. Amidst these volatile circumstances, the threat of military intervention looms, with President Trump threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act, and thousands of federal agents and active-duty soldiers being mobilized to suppress the unrest, leading to accusations from local officials of an unwarranted federal invasion into their city. The Associated Press details the internal controversy within CBS News regarding the airing of a critical report on Trump's deportation policies, which was abruptly pulled from the 60 Minutes lineup a month ago. Correspondent Sharon Alfonsi's investigation into the harsh conditions at El Salvador's Sicotte prison, where deportees are sent, was deemed too politically sensitive by CBS's new leadership, specifically editor-in-chief Bari Weiss, who argued the story lacked sufficient balance. Despite the story's removal from the broadcast, it was inadvertently released online through a Canadian partner, allowing the public to access its content. The report included interviews with deportees and footage of President Trump and White House officials describing the prison as a place for heinous monsters, highlighting the administration's tough stance on immigration. The controversy underscores ongoing concerns about media independence and political influence, especially as the Trump administration's officials have become more publicly engaged with CBS News, with some threatening legal action if their interviews aren't aired in full. The episode exemplifies the tension between journalistic integrity and political pressures during a highly polarized political climate. The Independent reports on the FBI's request for agents across the United States to temporarily relocate to Minneapolis amid the surge of protests following the fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE officer. The FBI's call for volunteers coincides with a broader federal law enforcement deployment, including roughly 1,500 active-duty soldiers reportedly prepared for possible military involvement under the threat of invoking the Insurrection Act. Minneapolis's mayor, Jacob Frey, has condemned the federal response as an unwarranted invasion, criticizing the large presence of ICE and Border Patrol agents, and expressing concern over the potential militarization of the city. The protests have been fueled by community outrage over the shooting, which many see as unjustified, and the ongoing federal crackdown on Somali American communities accused of welfare fraud. President Trump has defended the aggressive immigration enforcement, framing it as a fight against violent criminals, but local officials and residents argue that the federal response is excessive and intended to intimidate, with some describing the situation as a dangerous escalation that threatens the city's safety and sovereignty. The Washington Post reports that the Pentagon is mobilizing approximately 1,500 active-duty soldiers from Alaska, readying them for a potential deployment to Minnesota amidst escalating tensions and protests over immigration enforcement. The unrest in Minneapolis intensified after the tragic shooting of Renee Good by ICE officers, sparking fierce confrontations between residents and federal agents. President Trump has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act to deploy military forces if local officials do not curb the protests, raising concerns about federal overreach. The city's mayor, Jacob Frey, condemned the idea, warning that military intervention would only deepen divisions, especially in a city already strained by the federal surge of immigration officers targeting Somali and Hmong communities. The situation remains volatile, with the possibility of active duty troops being used to protect federal property, though it's unclear if the president will invoke the law, which grants broad powers to deploy troops domestically. The Sydney Morning Herald highlights Bruce Springsteen's passionate condemnation of the Trump administration's aggressive deployment of ICE officers across American cities, describing their tactics as reminiscent of Gestapo methods. During a surprise performance in New Jersey, Springsteen passionately denounced the federal crackdown, calling it an invasion of American cities and urging citizens to oppose what he termed heavily armed mass federal troops. The singer-songwriter dedicated his song, The Promised Land, to Renee Good, the woman killed by ICE, emphasizing the moral outrage of federal agents targeting immigrant communities. Springsteen's outspoken criticism is part of his long-standing political activism, which has consistently challenged Trump's policies, even prompting the president to attack him publicly on social media. His remarks underscore a broader cultural resistance among artists and citizens alike against federal overreach and the erosion of civil liberties. The Globe and Mail reports that despite a nationwide decline in housing prices, certain Canadian regions buck the trend with notable growth or resilience. Quebec City leads with a remarkable 12% increase, driven by supply shortages and more affordable prices, as locals, buoyed by a cultural shift towards homeownership after pandemic-induced rent hikes, flood the market. Conversely, Toronto faces a 6% decline, with falling immigration and population, along with declining rents, putting downward pressure on prices and creating a buyer's market. Meanwhile, Regina continues to thrive with a 10% surge, fueled by low supply, only a quarter of the usual listings, and high demand from Canadians relocating from larger provinces, attracted by the city's affordability. Experts warn that these regional trends may shift, with some prairie markets potentially cooling down as Alberta shows signs of softness, but for now, these cities demonstrate how local factors can defy national housing trends. The Independent reports a somber warning from Bishop Rob Hirschfeld of the Episcopal Church of New Hampshire, who urges his clergy to prepare for a potential era of martyrdom amid rising violence and political unrest. During a vigil honoring Renee Good, a woman fatally shot by an ICE officer, Hirschfeld emphasized the historical sacrifices of clergy like Jonathan Daniels, who was killed shielding a black civil rights activist. He urged his congregation to get their affairs in order, not out of fear but as a preparation to stand firm in the face of possible danger, echoing a call for Christians to embody courage and love in turbulent times. Other religious leaders, including Bishop Sean W. Rowe and RT Reverend Craig Loya, echoed these sentiments, advocating for compassion and resistance rooted in faith, urging believers to confront hatred with love and to build a just world through hope and active witness. Meanwhile, ABC reports the Pentagon's readiness to deploy approximately 1,500 active duty soldiers from Alaska to Minnesota amid escalating protests over immigration enforcement, sparked by the tragic shooting of Renee Good. The military units, trained for cold weather operations, are on standby in case violence intensifies, with President Trump threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act to justify military intervention if protests continue. The situation has sparked fierce debates about constitutional boundaries and federal overreach, as local leaders like Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey condemn the idea of deploying troops as unconstitutional and unnecessary, emphasizing the peaceful nature of ongoing protests. Despite Trump's threats and the presence of federal forces, Minnesota's governor and local officials have mobilized the National Guard for support, advocating for peaceful protest and warning against federal overreach. The Associated Press highlights the vehement opposition from Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey and other local officials to the idea of deploying active-duty soldiers into Minnesota to quell protests. Frey describes the proposal as ridiculous and unconstitutional, emphasizing that the protests, which have been largely peaceful, are a vital exercise of First Amendment rights. As thousands of residents, including postal workers and community members, rally against the federal crackdown, the tension between federal authority and local sovereignty becomes stark. The situation is further complicated by social media videos depicting aggressive federal tactics, such as pepper spraying and forcible detentions, prompting legal rulings to protect peaceful protesters. The controversy underscores the fragile balance between maintaining order and respecting constitutional rights amid a deeply divided political climate, with local leaders urging restraint and emphasizing the importance of peaceful activism. The Associated Press reports that the U.S. military is preparing for a potential deployment of 1,500 soldiers to Minnesota amid heightened tensions surrounding federal immigration enforcement. The Pentagon has ordered 2 infantry battalions of the Army's 11th Airborne Division, based in Alaska and trained for Arctic conditions, to stand ready should President Donald Trump invoke the Insurrection Act, a rarely used law that allows active duty troops to be employed in law enforcement. This move follows Trump's recent threats to deploy troops to quell protests over immigration crackdowns, although he later suggested there was no immediate need. Minnesota's Democratic governor, Tim Walz, has urged the president to refrain from escalating tensions, emphasizing the importance of peace and unity during a period of political unrest and civil discontent. Yahoo US highlights the ongoing federal immigration crackdowns in New York City and across the United States, with a focus on legal advice and community responses. Newly elected Mayor Zoran Mamdani has made it clear that he will not cooperate with federal immigration agents, reaffirming the city's sanctuary policies. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem's recent visits and high-profile ICE operations have intensified scrutiny on immigration enforcement, especially following the tragic shooting of a mother of 3 by an ICE officer in Minneapolis. Immigration attorneys, advocacy groups, and employers are bracing for increased oversight on hiring practices, visa applications, and foreign-born workers, as the federal government seeks to tighten immigration controls amidst a climate of heightened tension and concern. The Associated Press also reports on a somber warning from Bishop Rob Hirschfeld of New Hampshire, who urged clergy to prepare for a new era of martyrdom amid ongoing immigration controversies and violence. During a vigil honoring Renee Good, a woman killed by an ICE officer, Hirschfeld emphasized that Christian leaders might face risks similar to historical figures who sacrificed their lives for justice. While he did not call for violence, he urged clergy to be prepared spiritually and practically, including finalizing wills, to stand firm in the face of potential danger. Other religious leaders echoed these sentiments, calling for compassion and resistance rooted in love, as they navigate a turbulent political landscape where faith and activism intersect with issues of immigration, violence, and social justice. The Globe and Mail vividly depicts the tense atmosphere in Minneapolis, where federal authorities are preparing for a potential military deployment amid ongoing protests following the deadly shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent. The Pentagon has ordered about 1,500 active duty troops from Alaska to be on standby, a move that has sparked concern among local leaders and residents. President Trump, fueled by accusations of lawlessness and unrest, has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would allow him to deploy military forces domestically, citing the need to protect federal property and enforce immigration policies. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz have condemned these threats, emphasizing that crime rates are actually decreasing and warning that such military intervention would be a shocking escalation, further deepening the city's trauma and distrust. Yahoo US reports on the broader political and social implications of Trump's aggressive stance against protests and immigration enforcement in cities like Minneapolis. The article highlights how federal agents, heavily armed and often masked, have been unleashed across major American cities, leading to violent clashes, mass arrests, and community upheaval. Trump's deployment of federal forces, including the National Guard and ICE officers, is portrayed as a politically motivated crackdown aimed at intimidating Democratic-led cities. Critics argue that this militarization amounts to an abuse of power, with federal authorities accused of racially profiling, harassing, and terrorizing residents. The administration's use of the Insurrection Act and other extraordinary measures has been widely condemned as an assault on civil liberties, transforming urban neighborhoods into battlegrounds and fueling fears of authoritarian overreach. The Independent offers an even more comprehensive look at the chaos unleashed by Trump's immigration and law enforcement policies, illustrating how the administration's promise of the largest deportation operation has turned the nation's streets into scenes of violence and disorder. Federal agencies, especially ICE, have expanded exponentially under Trump, with record funding and a surge in arrests, most of whom have no criminal convictions, leading to widespread detention and abuse. Stories of brutal conditions inside detention centers, including reports of physical violence and neglect, expose the human toll of this aggressive crackdown. The administration's relentless pursuit of immigration enforcement has not only increased deportations to historic levels but also delegalized millions of legal residents, creating a climate of fear and chaos. The article underscores how these policies have fractured communities, provoked protests, and prompted legal battles, all while the president's rhetoric and actions threaten to erode the constitutional protections of American citizens and residents alike. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.
Morning coffee, fresh off the press. Reading headlines, feeling blessed. World keeps turning, stories unfold. Every moment news gets told. Flipping channels, clicking tabs. Feeding my mind's hunger grabs. Facts and figures, images bright. News keeps rolling day and night. Headlines and headlines, can't get enough. Learning about the world, yeah, it's my stuff. Headlines and headlines, stories unfold. Knowledge is power, truth to behold. Politics, science, sports, and art. Every story plays its part. Global voices, voices near. Every headline loud and clear. Need the latest, got to know. Never stopping, always go. Scrolling, swiping, reading on. Daylight breaks in the dawn. Headlines and headlines, can't get enough. Learning about the world, yeah, it's my stuff. Headlines and headlines, stories unfold. Knowledge is power, truth to behold. Need the latest, got to know. Never stopping, always go. Scrolling, swiping, reading on. Daylight breaks in the dawn. Headlines and headlines, can't get enough.